What is a religion? Some scholars think that it's important to come up with a tight definition for the term religion, to give a definition that captures all and only religions. We could spend a lot of time going through a number of proposed definitions of the concept of religion. We could argue about whether Marxism is a religion or environmentalism is a religion, or whether the most austere forms of Buddhism should really count as religions. Myself, I don't see why we need to have a tight definition for the concept of religion. It seems to me that we know what sort of things we're talking about, and we would better spend our time to just get on exploring the religions. So instead of launching into a big discussion of proposed definitions of the concept of religion, I'm going to talk about the word religion, and I'm going to point out that we use the word religion in a couple of different ways. Sometimes when we talk about a religion, we mean a set of doctrines. We mean the sort of thing that can be believed or disbelieved. A person might say, I don't believe Christianity. Another says, I believe in Islam. When they use the word Christianity or the word Islam in those sentences, they're referring to a set of doctrines. And certainly doctrine is an aspect of anything that we're going to call a religion. One thing I think all religions assume is that people need something religious. They don't do well if just left to themselves to grow wild, so to speak. There are some doctrines and or some practices and or some community which people really need. They need it because all humans have a certain deep problem. Of course, we have lots of problems. We're short on time and money. We wish we had more friends. Can't find a girlfriend. Don't like the person who got elected president. But religions purport to tell us what the most basic problem that faces human beings is. The deepest problem, the problem from which our other problems stem. For example, in most kinds of Christianity, the diagnosis is that the human race is fallen. The human race has turned its back on God. And there's been a rupture in the relationship between human beings and the one God. It's because of this rupture that we do all the other lousy things that we do. In some forms of Buddhism and Hinduism, the diagnosis is more like this. We take things as they seem. We don't understand our true nature or our true self. We don't understand the deep self that isn't as apparent as the surface self. The diagnosis is that we're ignorant of our own true nature. Of course, any religion isn't going to just leave things there, just point out that we have some devastating, crippling problem. Any religion is going to specify for us a cure. That is, a way to permanently and positively resolve this problem. It's going to be a permanent fix, not a temporary one. It's not like trying to drink away your problems or to just stick your head in the sand and ignore the problem. And it's going to give us a positive resolution. It's not like escaping your problems by killing yourself or kicking a puppy or anything like that. So the cure is going to be something permanent and positive. It's going to address, in fact, resolve that fundamental problem facing human beings. Third, a religion is going to specify one or more treatments. These are things that you can do or things that you should believe which will enable you to eventually get the cure. There are means to the cure. And fourth, a religious tradition is going to specify for us one or more exemplars. These are previous people who have gotten the cure. They model for us the process of applying the treatments and getting the cure. An exemplar is someone to imitate, like Jesus or the Buddha or Moses. Now, some social science scholars who work in religious studies, people like sociologists, have worried that focusing on doctrines is a kind of Christian bias. I would say it's certainly true that Christians have been more focused on doctrines and on the study of holy texts than people in most other religions. In many other cases outside of Christianity, practice is at least as important as having true beliefs. You could say that Christianity has an unusual theological emphasis, an unusual emphasis on having true beliefs about God. Of course, this is just a matter of degree. Many, probably most religions, put some emphasis on having the correct beliefs. I would also point out that beliefs are fundamental. That is, fundamental to a religious tradition. This is to say that when you're trying to understand a religious tradition, beliefs are a good place to start. It's only when you understand the beliefs that the artwork, that the practices, that the leadership structure, that the emotional ethos, the emotional temperature of the whole thing is going to make sense. To understand religious people and religious traditions, you need to understand what the beliefs are, what they're assuming about reality, about humankind, and so on. It's by no means all there is to a religious tradition, but it does seem to be a fundamental aspect of any religious tradition. Having said that, there can be a great divide between the official statements of a religion and what ordinary people in that religion actually believe, just as there can be a big divide between the sort of behavior a religion says is correct behavior and what people in that religion actually do. Some scholars call what ordinary people in a religion actually believe and base their actions on every day, they call that implicit religion, and they contrast it with the official religion. And it's always good to keep in mind when you're studying texts and ancient sources that the way the religion operates and the beliefs that the religion involves may differ quite a bit from those of the founders and things that were done many centuries ago. Another thing that's meant by religion is a community of people. So if you say Christianity has more people than any other religion in the world, when you say Christianity, you're referring to a community, to a collection of people. Ideally, a religion in this sense is united around some set of doctrines and practices, ideally believing those doctrines and acting according to those ways. But of course, very often, if you talk about Christianity and you just mean Christendom or that civilization or group of civilizations and countries and cultures which have been influenced by Christianity, you're really talking about a group of people who are operating in a social system that was constructed by people to some extent who did hold those beliefs and keep those practices. So again, when you talk about Islam, you're talking about a group of people living in a certain part of the world. You're talking about a certain large community of people. That's going to include people who believe the traditional doctrines of Islam, but it's also going to include people who are kind of along for the ride. They're operating within a system that was largely set up by people who believed that in former days. Some sociologists have insisted that a religion must be an observable thing if we're going to have meaningful empirical research. Empirical research is research based on observation. You can't empirically observe beliefs, nor can you empirically observe large-scale historical processes. So some sociologists like to think of religion as a community. Here's a definition offered by a couple of famous sociologists, Stark and Bainbridge. I'll give you the reference in a second. They say a religion is a human organization primarily engaged in providing systems of general compensators based on supernatural assumptions. Their idea is that we have a lot of losses and setbacks and needs, unmet needs in our lives. Religions always hold out some hope that we can get some of these needs met and some of these problems fixed. In their view, a religion always does this by giving us some means to interact with something supernatural, something beyond the physical world. I don't really have any objection to this type of definition. I just don't insist that a religion has to be an observable thing. My training is in philosophy, and so I'm not going to stick with what's merely observable. I'm also going to talk about beliefs and motives, experiences, desires, and things like that, things which are not directly observable. Another thing we can mean by religion is a whole big historical process, a large-scale event with people, institutions, leadership, rituals, rules, experiences, and so on. This isn't a definition of the concept of religion. This is just a way of using the word religion. This was laid out by the influential philosopher and religious scholar Ninian Smart, who delineated 7 different aspects of religions. and many of us who teach religious studies find these to be helpful. A religion, in this sense, is a very big and complicated thing. Here are some different dimensions to it. First, there's the doctrinal and philosophical dimension. This is what a religion teaches about the world, what's real, about human beings, how we fit into the world. And in particular, it gives us the diagnosis and cure that we talked about a moment ago. Second, there's a mythic or narrative dimension to any religious tradition. The term myth in religious studies doesn't describe something that is necessarily false. A myth could be true or false. The point of calling a story a myth is that it is a special life-guiding story, which is usually, but not in all cases, believed to be true. Religious people will think of themselves as one or more of the characters, and they'll think that different things in this story represent, say, challenges that they face. A myth will be kind of a lens through which they observe their world. It's a kind of guide for their emotions, beliefs, and actions. Not every old story is a myth in this sense. Legends, folk tales, novels, short stories, they are not necessarily myths. Third, there's an ethical and legal dimension. Some religions are or include governments, and so they really literally have a legal dimension, a dimension of law and courts, arbitration of disputes. Any religion, of course, has ethical demands. These are standards about what should be done and what should not be done. Fourth, religions have a ritual and practical aspect. There are things that you do in any religious tradition. There are things that you do individually, and there are usually things that you do on a group level as well. Those can be very important to those people. Fifth, there's the experiential and emotional dimension to it. People in religions typically have certain kinds of religious experiences, and they also typically feel certain ways. Sixth, there's the social and organizational aspect. The people in religions are divided into families, churches, synagogues, clans, other sorts of social groups. Is there any religious leadership? Are there priests? Is there anything like a pope? And finally, there's the material and artistic side of religion. What kind of objects do they use? What kind of objects do they produce? What kind of art do they make? In this class, we'll try to some extent to cover all of these aspects. I will to some extent focus on the first aspect, the aspect of belief, doctrine, philosophy, which I think is foundational. But this course is also historically oriented. So we're going to go beyond describing these traditions as they're currently found. And we're going to inquire, where did they come from? How did they get started? Who, if anyone, founded them? And so on. One final distinction that might be of use to you is that religious studies is a field and not a discipline. That is to say that religious studies is a subject matter. It's the subject matter I've just indicated. It deals with religions. It's not a discipline like sociology, psychology, philosophy, or history. A discipline has its own group of methods, its own academic departments, its own specific history, its own specific lore and literature. Religious studies is a subject matter which is explored by people from many disciplines. So this is an interdisciplinary class. In religious studies, although there are now a few religious studies departments around, religious studies is still really interdisciplinary, and how it's approached is going to be affected by the training and the background, you could say by the guild, of the scholar who's engaging in it. As I've already indicated, my background is philosophy, and so in some ways you're going to get a philosopher's take on the world religions. Having said that, we'll take insights wherever we can get them, whether they're from historians, sociologists, psychologists, and so on. In our next lecture, we'll start to explore the fascinating world of Hinduism.